NATO has said that it has responded immediately to intercept Russian military jets that have violated Estonian airspace. But the Russian military explained that the flight of the 3 fighter jets was scheduled and were in strict accordance with airspace rules. The Estonian Prime Minister, Kirsten Michal, triggered NATO's Article 4. That's the measure where urgent talks are conducted with NATO countries where members feel its territorial integrity, political independence or security is at risk. Now, it's been a second time it's been triggered in just over a week. Here's President Donald Trump talking when asked about it yesterday.
I don't love it. I don't like it when that happens. It could be big trouble.
Could be big trouble. Well, let's welcome Stefanie Babst, former Deputy Assistant Secretary General of NATO. Stefanie, welcome to the show. Thanks for giving us your time.
Yeah, good to be back. Good afternoon, Alexis.
What was your immediate reaction when you read about that violation of those 3 Russian fighter jets in Estonian airspace?
Well, I wasn't really surprised, but because there is a broad pattern behind. We've seen so many efforts of the Kremlin to probe NATO, to provoke NATO, and then there is the context of the broader hybrid war of Russia against NATO countries. So no, I wasn't surprised, but I had certainly hoped that by now the NATO allies had agreed on very clear and robust rules of engagement and simply shut them down.
I mean, I was looking, Stefanie, at it was 2015, I believe, in a Russian jet violated Turkish airspace only by about 1,100 yards. It was there for 17 seconds. It had been warned for about 5 minutes to change its course, which it ignored. It was there for 17 seconds. It was shot down by Turkey immediately. Why do you think we haven't seen that repeat with this violation?
Well, I vividly recall that 2015 incident, and I also recall the NATO allies being pretty nervous about a potential Russian reaction. But the Russians learned their thing. I mean, they refrained from intruding further Turkish airspace. So that was a very clear sign. But now, almost, 9 years later, 10 years later, it is clear that the NATO allies are even more nervous about a potential Russian reaction. And that's why they continue to, in my view, duck away from really addressing that threat as they should be, namely by sending a strong signal. And as I already said, shooting Russian drones or jets or whatever they send over in order to violate NATO airspace simply down.
Talk me through that decision process, though, Stefanie. Would it have been something, because of course this decision has to be taken by the Estonian military? Could it decide something like that unilaterally and take down 3 Russian fighter jets, or do they have to consult with NATO first?
Well, ideally, as I said, I don't know for sure, but I would suggest that NATO allies have already agreed on a set of rules of engagement. I mean, we've had already a number of grave incidents in the past month, so they had ample time in order to agree on what is it exactly they need to do, they want to do, and who is authorized to do it. And apart from informing the military chain of command and asking F-35s from Italy to do their air policing and to escort MiGs politely out of Estonian airspace, I would strongly suggest that every individual nation must have the right to take its own decision based on what they see, based on how they think an appropriate reaction should look like. But I in doubt that NATO has already agreed on these type of rules of engagements.
Stefanie, where's the reticence in your view? Why is NATO being reticent when it comes to dealing with Russia the same way that we saw Turkey deal with that Russian fighter jet in 2015? They just shot it down.
Well, I keep on making the point, in fact, ever since 3.5 years. I mean, first of all, the NATO allies still have not been able to agree on any type of, compelling strategy, what to do with a aggressive, reckless Russia? What is it that they want to do with it other than issuing press statements? Secondly, there have been, from the very beginning of Ukraine's war against from Russia's war against Ukraine, very reluctant in order to cross their self-imposed own red lines because they are so afraid that this could lead to an escalation. And this is something that President Putin uses every single day that we've now seen into the war. I mean, he crosses every red line, and he wants to see the NATO allies divided, decomposed, irritated, weak, and clearly he's testing its military readiness. So what I think we have now landed at is that NATO actually has a very significant issue with its deterrence. It's not properly functioning anymore, because if it was, Russia wouldn't dare to intrude and violate NATO airspaces almost every single day. So in order to reestablish a credible deterrent, a military deterrent, it needs much more than sending a couple of air policing jets into the airspace and escort Russian MiGs out. We really need to, I think, send a strong signal, and a strong signal, I repeat it for the third time, was to make very sure and very clear to Moscow, end of story, no more joking, no more bullying, we shoot your drones and your jets down.
Who is going to lead that strong signal? It seems to me the picture you're painting is everyone in NATO is looking around at each other. No one's wanting to take that first step or to agree on what those red lines will be. Is it going to be the Secretary General, Mark Rutte? Is it going to be Donald Trump who actually sets the rules for this? Who's going to step up and make that decision?
Well, I mean, that's the multi-million-dollar question. I think as long as NATO allies continue to look at the reaction of Donald Trump, I mean, they will continue to be disappointed because there won't be any robust reaction by the Americans towards Russia. The Americans have said repeatedly, President Trump has said repeatedly, that he doesn't regard Russia as a security threat. End of story. But this message has not yet really landed in European heads. So we continue to look at the U.S. Commitment to NATO, which is dubious at best. So, and then we have the UK. I would have very much liked to see the UK being in the lead, and particularly when it comes to make use of the Joint Expeditionary Force and inviting Ukraine as a full member. Now, after what I've seen in the past few days, hosting President Trump so brilliantly and so pompously in the UK, I really doubt, I mean, whether the UK is in a position to really lead a coalition of the force that produces more than just press statements and photos, namely action. So yes, we do have a void of leadership in Europe, and I continue to look primarily at those countries who live at the borderline next to Russia, who are, who are countries like Finland or Sweden and the Baltic countries, who will have the courage to actually say, end of story here. We will not allow Russia to bully us around and intimidate us constantly, and then Brussels only produce a statement. This is not, this is not a policy. This is a joke.
But Stefanie, do you think that we're ever going to see that contact between NATO forces and Russian forces if Donald Trump is still in the picture? It's quite clear that he has to give the go-ahead, right?
Does he? Does he really? I think, again, a point I keep on making for a long time already. I think, we are Europeans dealing with a European security problem. Russia is our problem. The war that Russia, carries out and conducts in Ukraine is our issue. So we must stop to look at Washington, and particularly because, the United States is no longer a reliable ally. And once we have understood that and look at this issue as a European security issue, as our own issue, hopefully then finally, after 3.5 years, people will come to grips with it. I admit sometimes I give up hope, but I I keep on making the points nevertheless.
To be fair to you, Stefanie, you did make the exact same point to me on this very show back in February, that you said that Donald Trump was not a reliable NATO ally. Look, my final question to you, do you expect these kinds of incidents to escalate and to become more frequent? Russia prodding the sort of NATO's patience, if you like.
Oh, yes. President Putin will continue to probe us, to provoke us. He has accelerated the tempo of that in recent months, possibly also because he continues to be a bit, let's say, frustrated due to the lack of military progress he makes on the ground. He keeps on bombarding Ukrainian cities and towns like crazy. And yet, Ukrainians still stand and they still hold the line. So, yeah, this must be at least partially frustrating to him. So he tries to come from another corner or around another angle and tries to weaken our own resolve and solidarity with Ukraine. It's all pretty obvious. But again, as long, as he thinks he's on the path to victory, because we are so terribly weak and so cowardish and so busy with ourselves, he has a good chance to actually, to prevail. And I think we must prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Stefanie, I know that was going to be my last question. We're going to squeeze another one in. Is part of the problem that we've seen a rather close and people have said somewhat strange relationship between Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, and President Trump? Now, I refer to perhaps the misuse of the word daddy, which Mark Rutte came out and said, look, it was probably the wrong word. It wasn't what I meant in that context. But is Mark Rutte basically not a strong enough leader of NATO, as Secretary General, than what we need right now?
President Trump wants to transform NATO into a transnational hub, where there are allies who are willing to buy, weapons and U.S. capabilities and technologies. And perhaps, for that, they will get some kind of, let's say, protection, and others not. And Mark Rutte is the guy who helps him transforming this alliance, from a club of like-minded democracies into a transnational hub. And that's why I continue to criticize him.
Stefanie, you've been very clear. Thank you so much for joining us, as always. Stefanie Babst there, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary General of NATO.